In the dimly lit chambers of the Palazzo Vecchio, where shadows danced with the flickering candlelight of political intrigue, Niccolò Machiavelli understood a truth that would echo through centuries: the greatest enemy of human achievement is not external opposition, but the comfortable weakness that grows within us like a cancer when life becomes too easy. This was not merely a philosophical observation but a practical reality witnessed through decades of observing princes rise and fall, republics flourish and crumble, and individuals transform from promising leaders into cautionary tales of squandered potential. The Renaissance master who would become synonymous with political cunning possessed something far more valuable than strategic intellect. He had discovered the secret of mental steel, that rare alloy of character that allows certain individuals to accomplish what others deem impossible. This mental steel was not inherited nobility or divine blessing, but rather a carefully forged strength created through the systematic destruction of one's weaker impulses and the methodical construction of unbreakable resolve. Machiavelli's observations of human nature revealed a disturbing pattern that repeats across all eras and cultures. When individuals are given everything they desire without struggle, they become soft, entitled, and ultimately powerless when faced with genuine adversity. The pampered prince who inherits his throne rarely possesses the steel of the self-made ruler who carved his kingdom from nothing. The merchant's son who inherits a successful business often lacks the hunger and resourcefulness of his father who built the enterprise through countless nights of sacrifice and risk. This is not coincidence but natural law. Strength unused atrophies, and comfort unchallenged breeds weakness. The Italian political theorist witnessed this principle play out on the grand stage of Renaissance politics, where city-states rose and fell based not merely on resources or military might, but on the character of their leaders. Those who had been tested by adversity, who had been forced to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles, possessed a quality that their more comfortable counterparts lacked entirely. They had learned to transform pain into power, obstacles into opportunities, and, most importantly, they had learned to systematically eliminate the weaker aspects of their nature that would sabotage their efforts at crucial moments. This process of self-transformation was not gentle self-improvement or gradual adjustment of habits. It was warfare, internal warfare waged against every impulse toward ease, every rationalization of mediocrity, every excuse for avoiding necessary but uncomfortable action. Machiavelli understood that the human psyche contains within it both the seeds of greatness and the mechanisms of self-destruction, and the difference between those who achieve lasting success and those who fail lies entirely in which of these forces they choose to cultivate. The weak self that must be destroyed is not simply laziness or lack of motivation. It is far more insidious and sophisticated. It is the voice that convinces you to wait for better circumstances before taking action. It is the rationalization that suggests your current discomfort is unbearable when it is merely inconvenient. It is the comfortable lie that tomorrow you will be more prepared, more motivated, more capable than you are today. It is the subtle sabotage that occurs when you are on the verge of breakthrough, when your subconscious mind manufactures crises and distractions to prevent you from crossing the threshold into a higher level of capability and responsibility. Machiavelli observed that most individuals carry within themselves a complete infrastructure of self-defeat, carefully constructed over years of choosing the easier path, accepting comfortable limitations, and avoiding the discomfort required for genuine growth. This infrastructure operates automatically, requiring no conscious participation from its host. It springs into action whenever real challenge appears, generating an endless supply of reasonable-sounding excuses for why extraordinary effort is unnecessary, why ambitious goals are unrealistic, why maintaining the status quo is actually the wisest course of action. The transformation from weakness to strength, from victim of circumstances to master of destiny, requires nothing less than the complete demolition of this internal infrastructure of defeat and its replacement with systems of thought and behavior that automatically generate strength rather than weakness, action rather than hesitation, resilience rather than fragility. This is not a project that can be completed in a few weeks of intense effort or through reading inspiring books and attending motivational seminars. It is the work of years, requiring the same methodical attention to detail that a master craftsman brings to creating a work of art. The first enemy that must be identified and systematically eliminated is the addiction to comfort that modern life cultivates so efficiently. This addiction operates on multiple levels, from the obvious desire for physical ease and convenience to the more subtle craving for emotional comfort and psychological security. The comfort-addicted individual becomes increasingly intolerant of any form of discomfort, developing an elaborate set of avoidance behaviors that ensure they never have to face genuinely challenging situations for extended periods. This comfort addiction creates a vicious cycle where the individual becomes progressively weaker and more dependent on external circumstances for their well-being. When faced with genuine adversity, the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, a health crisis, or any situation requiring significant personal sacrifice and effort, they discover that their capacity for sustained effort and emotional resilience has atrophied from disuse. They find themselves overwhelmed by challenges that their ancestors would have considered merely inconvenient. Machiavelli understood that strength is not a permanent possession but a perishable asset that must be constantly renewed through use. Like physical muscle, mental and emotional strength dissipates rapidly when not regularly exercised under increasingly demanding conditions. The individual who avoids discomfort in the name of self-care or work-life balance is unknowingly participating in their own systematic weakening, ensuring that when life inevitably presents them with unavoidable challenges, they will be unprepared to meet them with the strength and resourcefulness that success requires. The second enemy is the rationalization engine that operates continuously in the background of consciousness, generating an endless stream of logical-sounding reasons why extraordinary effort is unnecessary, why ambitious goals are actually signs of unhealthy perfectionism, why accepting limitations is actually wisdom rather than surrender. This mental faculty, which evolved to help humans avoid unnecessary risk in more primitive environments, becomes a sophisticated system of self-sabotage in the modern world, where the greatest risks often come from being too cautious rather than too bold. The rationalization engine operates by taking legitimate concerns and inflating them into insurmountable obstacles, by taking minor setbacks and transforming them into evidence of fundamental impossibility, by taking the natural discomfort that accompanies growth and reframing it as a sign that something is wrong rather than recognition that progress is being made. It specializes in making the extraordinary seem impossible and the mediocre seem sensible. Defeating this enemy requires developing what Machiavelli would have recognized as intellectual honesty so ruthless that it refuses to accept any explanation for failure or limitation that cannot withstand the most severe scrutiny. This means examining every excuse, every rationalization, every comfortable explanation for why things cannot be different with the assumption that it is probably self-serving fiction rather than objective reality. It means developing the habit of asking not whether something is difficult or uncomfortable, but whether it is truly impossible when approached with sufficient intelligence, persistence, and resourcefulness. The third enemy is perhaps the most dangerous because it disguises itself as virtue, the need for external validation and approval. This need creates a fundamental dependency that undermines all other efforts at self-strengthening because it places the individual's sense of worth and direction in the hands of others, many of whom have no investment in the individual's success and may indeed benefit from their continued weakness and mediocrity. The approval-seeking individual cannot pursue truly ambitious goals because such goals inevitably require making decisions and taking actions that others will criticize, misunderstand, or actively oppose. They cannot maintain the consistency of effort that major achievements require because they are constantly adjusting their behavior based on the reactions and opinions of others. They cannot develop authentic strength because they are too busy performing the appearance of strength for an audience that changes its expectations without notice. Most insidiously, the need for approval creates a subtle but powerful incentive to remain mediocre, because mediocrity is safe and non-threatening to others, while excellence often generates envy, criticism, and attempts at sabotage from those who have accepted limitations for themselves and resent reminders that those limitations may be self-imposed rather than genuinely insurmountable. Machiavelli observed that the most effective leaders throughout history shared a common characteristic: they had learned to derive their sense of worth and direction from their own standards and objectives rather than from the approval or disapproval of others. This did not make them sociopathic or indifferent to human relationships, but it made them immune to the constant pressure to conform to others' expectations and limitations. The fourth enemy is the addiction to immediate gratification that modern technology and consumer culture have elevated to unprecedented levels. This addiction operates by training the nervous system to expect constant stimulation and immediate rewards, making it increasingly difficult to sustain attention and effort on projects that require weeks, months, or years of consistent work before producing visible results. The immediate gratification addict becomes incapable of making short-term sacrifices for long-term benefits, because their nervous system has been conditioned to interpret any delay in reward as evidence that they are on the wrong path. They jump from project to project, relationship to relationship, strategy to strategy, always in search of something that will provide immediate satisfaction without requiring sustained effort or temporary discomfort. This addiction is particularly destructive because most achievements worth pursuing require what Machiavelli would have called patient violence, the ability to apply steady, consistent pressure over extended periods, often without visible progress or external encouragement. The great works of art, the successful businesses, the meaningful relationships, the significant contributions to human knowledge and welfare all require the ability to continue working when the work is boring, when progress is invisible, when doubt and discouragement are constant companions. Breaking this addiction requires systematically reconstructing the reward systems of the brain through deliberate practice of delayed gratification. This means choosing projects that require sustained effort over weeks and months before producing results, learning to find satisfaction in the process of work rather than only in its completion, and developing what ancient philosophers would have recognized as the capacity for sustained attention, the ability to focus deeply on a single task for extended periods without distraction or restlessness. The fifth enemy is the fear of failure that masquerades as prudence and careful planning. This fear operates by inflating the consequences of potential setbacks while minimizing both the likelihood of success and the costs of inaction. It generates an endless series of what-if scenarios that always conclude with catastrophic outcomes, making any ambitious action seem recklessly dangerous. The fear-paralyzed individual spends enormous amounts of time and energy planning, researching, and preparing for action that they never actually take. They become experts at identifying obstacles and problems but never develop competence at overcoming them through direct experience. They wait for perfect conditions that never arrive, for complete certainty that is never available, for guarantees that life never provides. Machiavelli understood that fear of failure is actually fear of the discomfort that accompanies learning and growth. Failure, properly understood, is simply feedback, information about what approaches work and what approaches need modification. But the fear-driven individual experiences failure as an assault on their identity rather than as valuable data about reality, making them increasingly risk-averse and limiting their exposure to the very experiences that would develop their judgment and capabilities. Overcoming this fear requires redefining failure from something to be avoided at all costs to something to be courted intelligently as the fastest way to develop competence and resilience. It requires developing what could be called experimental courage, the willingness to test ideas and approaches through action rather than endless analysis, with the understanding that most experiments will produce unexpected results rather than immediate success, and that these unexpected results are often more valuable than the originally intended outcomes. The systematic destruction of these enemies, comfort addiction, rationalization, approval seeking, immediate gratification, and fear of failure, creates space for the construction of mental steel. But destruction alone is insufficient. It must be followed by deliberate construction of new mental and emotional capacities that automatically generate strength rather than weakness when faced with challenging circumstances. The first capacity that must be built is what Machiavelli would have called philosophical ruthlessness, the ability to see reality clearly without the distortions created by wishful thinking, emotional attachment, or social pressure. This means developing the habit of asking not what you want to be true or what would be comfortable to believe, but what is actually true based on evidence and direct experience. Philosophical ruthlessness requires accepting that many comfortable beliefs about yourself, your circumstances, and your possibilities may be inaccurate or incomplete. It means being willing to abandon strategies, relationships, and even fundamental assumptions about life when evidence suggests they are not producing the results you actually want rather than the results you think you should want. This capacity is essential because self-deception is the foundation of all other forms of weakness. The individual who cannot see themselves clearly will make decisions based on fantasy rather than reality, will pursue strategies that feel good rather than strategies that work, will interpret feedback in ways that protect their ego rather than ways that promote learning and growth. The second capacity is systematic preparation for adversity. Rather than hoping that life will be comfortable and easy, the mentally strong individual prepares systematically for difficulties, setbacks, and challenges. This preparation is not pessimistic but practical, an acknowledgement that adversity is inevitable and that the individual who is prepared for it will be able to respond more effectively than the individual who is surprised by it. Systematic preparation involves both mental and practical elements. Mentally, it means regularly visualizing potential setbacks and developing specific plans for how to respond to them. It means cultivating emotional resilience by deliberately exposing yourself to manageable levels of discomfort and difficulty so that your capacity for handling stress expands gradually over time. It means developing what Stoic philosophers called negative visualization, regularly imagining the loss of things you value so that you appreciate them more fully while having them and are better prepared emotionally if they are taken away. Practically, systematic preparation means building redundancy into every important area of life. This includes financial reserves that can sustain you through periods of reduced income, multiple sources of income that protect you from the loss of any single source, diverse skills that make you adaptable to changing circumstances, and relationships with people who can provide support and assistance during difficult periods. The third capacity is the development of what could be called aggressive patience, the ability to maintain consistent effort over extended periods while remaining alert to opportunities for acceleration. This is different from passive patience, which simply waits for things to improve, and from impatience, which abandons long-term projects when they don't produce immediate results. Aggressive patience involves maintaining high levels of activity and effort while accepting that results may take longer than initially expected. It means continuing to work on important projects even when progress is slow or invisible, while remaining constantly alert to opportunities to increase effectiveness or accelerate progress. This capacity is essential because most significant achievements require what economists call compound returns, small improvements that accumulate over time to produce dramatic results. But compound returns are only available to those who maintain consistency of effort over periods long enough for the compounding effect to become visible, and who resist the temptation to abandon their approach when progress is slow. Part 2, the architecture of unbreakable will. The transformation from weakness to strength is not merely a matter of changing behaviors or adopting new habits. It requires a fundamental reconstruction of the architecture of decision-making, the automatic processes by which the mind evaluates options and commits to action. Machiavelli understood that most people fail not because they lack knowledge about what they should do, but because their internal decision-making systems are designed to generate weakness rather than strength when faced with difficulty. The weak individual operates from what could be called comfort-seeking architecture, a set of automatic mental processes that prioritize short-term ease and pleasure over long-term benefit and growth. When faced with a choice between a difficult action that would produce significant long-term benefits and an easy action that maintains the status quo, this architecture automatically generates justifications for choosing ease. It searches for reasons why the difficult action is unnecessary, dangerous, or impossible, while minimizing the long-term costs of continued mediocrity. This architecture was not consciously chosen but developed gradually through years of making decisions based on immediate comfort rather than long-term benefit. Each time the individual chose the easier path, they strengthened the neural pathways associated with avoidance and weakness while allowing the pathways associated with courage and persistent effort to atrophy. Over time, choosing weakness becomes so automatic that the individual is no longer conscious of making a choice at all. They simply find themselves unable to sustain effort when it becomes difficult or uncomfortable. The reconstruction of this architecture requires what Machiavelli would have recognized as strategic self-discipline, not the rigid suppression of all desires and impulses, but the intelligent redirection of motivational energy toward objectives that serve long-term flourishing rather than short-term comfort. This reconstruction cannot be accomplished through willpower alone, because willpower is a limited resource that becomes depleted through use. Instead, it requires changing the underlying systems that generate motivation and decision-making. The first principle of architectural reconstruction is the development of what could be called identity-based motivation. Instead of relying on external rewards or temporary enthusiasm to maintain effort, the individual learns to derive motivation from a carefully constructed identity that naturally generates the behaviors required for success. This process begins with a clear definition of who you are becoming rather than simply what you want to achieve. The individual who defines themselves as someone who is trying to get in shape will behave differently than someone who defines themselves as an athlete. The person who thinks of themselves as working on a business idea will approach challenges differently than someone who considers themselves an entrepreneur. Identity-based motivation is more reliable than goal-based motivation because identity is ongoing while goals are temporary. When you achieve a goal, the motivation associated with pursuing it disappears, often leading to regression back to previous levels of performance. But, when your motivation is based on identity, achieving one goal simply becomes evidence that confirms who you are and generates motivation to pursue the next level of growth and achievement. The construction of a powerful identity requires careful attention to both aspiration and evidence. The identity must be compelling enough to generate sustained motivation even during difficult periods, but it must also be supported by consistent evidence in the form of actions and achievements. An identity that is purely aspirational without supporting evidence becomes self-deception rather than self-improvement. This evidence is built through what could be called identity votes, daily actions that either support or contradict your chosen identity. Every decision is a vote for the type of person you are becoming. The individual who claims to be disciplined but consistently chooses comfort over effort is voting against their stated identity. The person who identifies as resilient but avoids challenging situations is undermining their own self-concept through contradictory behavior. Building a strong identity requires winning more identity votes than you lose each day. This doesn't mean perfection, it means consistent movement in the direction of your chosen identity despite temporary setbacks and occasional poor decisions. It means paying attention to the cumulative effect of your daily choices and making adjustments when you notice that your behavior is contradicting rather than supporting who you are trying to become. The second principle is the development of systematic exposure to progressive difficulty. Just as physical strength is built through progressive resistance training, mental and emotional strength is built through deliberately seeking out increasingly challenging situations that stretch your current capabilities without overwhelming them completely. This systematic exposure serves multiple purposes. It gradually expands your comfort zone, making previously intimidating situations feel manageable. It provides regular opportunities to practice the skills and mental habits that success requires. Most importantly, it generates what psychologists call mastery experiences, direct personal evidence that you can handle difficulty and overcome obstacles through persistent effort and intelligent strategy. Without regular mastery experiences, self-confidence remains fragile and dependent on external validation. With systematic accumulation of mastery experiences, confidence becomes unshakable because it is based on direct personal knowledge of your capabilities rather than on hopes or the opinions of others. The key to effective progressive difficulty is calibrating the challenges to match your current capacity. If the challenges are too easy, they don't produce growth or meaningful mastery experiences. If they are too difficult, they produce overwhelm and discouragement rather than confidence and capability. The optimal challenge level is what psychologists call the zone of proximal development, tasks that are difficult enough to require sustained effort and the development of new capabilities, but not so difficult that success is impossible with current resources and abilities. Finding this zone requires honest assessment of your current capabilities and willingness to adjust the difficulty level based on results rather than ego or external expectations. This systematic exposure must be maintained consistently over extended periods to produce permanent changes in capacity and confidence. Sporadic exposure to difficulty, even at high levels, does not produce the same results as consistent exposure at moderate levels. The individual who occasionally takes on huge challenges but generally avoids discomfort will not develop the same resilience as the person who seeks out manageable challenges on a daily basis. The third principle is the cultivation of what Machiavelli would have called strategic thinking, the ability to make decisions based on long-term consequences rather than immediate emotions or impulses. This requires developing mental models that help you evaluate the true costs and benefits of different courses of action, including costs and benefits that may not become apparent for months or years. Most people make decisions based on how they feel in the moment rather than on careful analysis of long-term consequences. They choose the job that feels comfortable rather than the one that offers the greatest potential for growth. They avoid having difficult conversations that could improve their relationships because the conversations would be temporarily uncomfortable. They postpone working on important projects because they don't feel motivated today, without considering the cumulative cost of repeated postponement. Strategic thinking requires developing what economists call intertemporal choice, the ability to make trade-offs between present and future benefits. This involves both intellectual understanding of compound effects and emotional capacity to tolerate short-term discomfort for long-term advantage. The intellectual component involves learning to think in systems and processes rather than events and outcomes. Instead of asking, "What do I want to happen?" the strategic thinker asks, "What system of actions, if maintained consistently over time, would produce the outcomes I want?" Instead of focusing on immediate results, they focus on building capabilities and momentum that will produce increasingly better results over time. The emotional component involves what could be called temporal patience, the ability to delay gratification not just for hours or days, but for months or years when pursuing truly significant objectives. This patience is not passive but active, involving consistent effort toward long-term goals even when progress is slow or invisible. Developing strategic thinking requires regular practice making decisions with a longer time horizon than feels natural. This means regularly asking questions like, "How will I feel about this decision in 5 years?" and "What are the second and third-order consequences of this choice?" It means developing the habit of considering not just immediate costs and benefits, but the cumulative effect of patterns of behavior over time. The fourth principle is the systematic elimination of energy leaks, activities, relationships, and mental habits that drain your resources without producing corresponding benefits. Most people underestimate how much of their available energy is consumed by things that don't actually matter to them but that they continue doing out of habit, social pressure, or fear of change. These energy leaks operate like financial debt, creating ongoing obligations that consume resources that could be directed toward more important objectives. Common energy leaks include relationships with people who are consistently negative or demanding without offering corresponding support, activities that are time-consuming but not meaningful or enjoyable, commitments made out of guilt rather than genuine desire, and mental habits like worry or resentment that consume attention without producing useful insights or solutions. Identifying energy leaks requires honest audit of how you actually spend your time, energy, and attention compared to how you think you spend them. This audit often reveals significant discrepancies between stated priorities and actual behavior, highlighting areas where resources are being wasted on activities that don't serve your most important objectives. Eliminating energy leaks is not always simple because many of them involve social obligations or deeply ingrained habits. However, the freed resources often provide dramatic improvements in your ability to pursue objectives that actually matter to you. The energy that was previously scattered across multiple obligations with minimal impact becomes available for focused effort on projects with significant long-term potential. The fifth principle is the development of what could be called adaptive resilience, the ability not just to survive setbacks and difficulties, but to use them as opportunities for growth and improvement. This involves reframing adversity from something to be endured to something to be leveraged for accelerated development. Adaptive resilience is built through developing specific mental and emotional responses to setbacks that automatically generate strength rather than weakness. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the adaptively resilient individual asks, "How can I use this situation to become stronger, smarter, or more capable?" Instead of focusing on the unfairness or difficulty of the situation, they focus on what they can learn from it and how they can emerge from it better than they entered it. This reframing is not mere positive thinking but strategic optimization of your response to unavoidable difficulties. Since setbacks and challenges are inevitable parts of any ambitious life, learning to extract maximum value from them dramatically accelerates your overall development compared to simply trying to minimize their impact. Adaptive resilience also involves developing what psychologists call anti-fragility, the quality of becoming stronger in response to stress rather than merely surviving it. This requires viewing challenges as training opportunities rather than obstacles, and seeking out difficulty that will stretch your capabilities in controlled ways rather than waiting for random adversity to test you unprepared. The systematic application of these principles over months and years produces what Machiavelli observed in the most effective leaders of his era, a quality of unshakable strength that appears almost supernatural to those who have not undertaken similar development. This strength is not inherited or accidental but carefully constructed through intelligent effort directed at the systematic elimination of weakness and the deliberate cultivation of capacity. The individual who possesses this strength cannot be broken by external circumstances because they have learned to derive their sense of worth and direction from internal sources rather than external validation. They cannot be discouraged by setbacks because they have learned to use adversity as fuel for accelerated growth. They cannot be manipulated through appeals to comfort or security because they have learned to find satisfaction in challenge and growth rather than ease and predictability. Most importantly, they cannot be defeated by their own weaknesses because they have systematically identified and eliminated the internal sources of self-sabotage that undermine most people's efforts at sustained achievement. They have become, in Machiavelli's terms, masters of their own destiny rather than victims of circumstances beyond their control. Part 3, The Mastery of Impossible Things. The ultimate expression of mental steel is not merely surviving adversity or achieving conventional success, but developing the capacity to accomplish what others consider impossible. Machiavelli understood that the difference between ordinary achievement and extraordinary accomplishment lies not in superior resources or favorable circumstances, but in the willingness to persist intelligently long after others would have given up. This persistence is not mere stubbornness or blind determination, but what could be called intelligent persistence, the ability to maintain consistent effort toward ambitious objectives while continuously adapting strategy based on feedback and changing circumstances. It involves the rare combination of unwavering commitment to ultimate outcomes with complete flexibility regarding the methods used to achieve them. The individual capable of accomplishing impossible things has developed three core capacities that are virtually unknown among the general population: the ability to maintain consistent effort over periods measured in years rather than weeks or months, the ability to function effectively while experiencing sustained uncertainty and discomfort, and the ability to continue working when progress is invisible or when early results suggest that success is unlikely. The first capacity, extended persistence, requires fundamental changes in how you relate to time and progress. Most people think in terms of achieving their goals within specific timeframes and become discouraged when progress is slower than expected. The individual capable of impossible things has learned to think in terms of directions rather than destinations, maintaining consistent movement toward their objectives regardless of how long the journey requires. This shift in temporal perspective is not merely philosophical but practical. It allows for the kind of compound development that produces extraordinary results over time. Small improvements maintained consistently for years produce capabilities that appear miraculous to those who think in terms of dramatic breakthroughs achieved quickly. Extended persistence also requires developing what could be called process satisfaction, the ability to find fulfillment in the daily work itself rather than only in its completion. This is essential because most impossible things require years of effort, much of which involves repetitive tasks that are not immediately rewarding. The individual who cannot find satisfaction in the process will not maintain the consistency required for extraordinary achievement. Developing process satisfaction involves learning to appreciate the subtle improvements in capability and understanding that occur through consistent practice, even when external results are not yet visible. It means finding meaning in the development of discipline, focus, and competence rather than only in external recognition or material rewards. The second capacity, comfort with uncertainty and discomfort, is perhaps even more rare because it contradicts the basic human drive for security and predictability. Most people require relatively high levels of certainty before taking action and become increasingly anxious as uncertainty persists. The individual capable of impossible things has learned not only to tolerate but to thrive in situations characterized by high uncertainty and sustained discomfort. This capacity is essential because impossible things, by definition, cannot be achieved through proven methods or established approaches. They require venturing into unexplored territory where success is not guaranteed and where the path forward becomes clear only through direct experimentation rather than advance planning. Developing comfort with uncertainty requires systematic exposure to situations where you must take action without complete information and where outcomes cannot be predicted with confidence. This exposure gradually increases your tolerance for ambiguity while developing your ability to make good decisions based on incomplete data. It also requires learning to distinguish between uncertainty about methods and uncertainty about ultimate success. The individual pursuing impossible things may be completely uncertain about how they will achieve their objective while remaining completely certain that they will eventually discover a way to do so. This combination of methodological flexibility with strategic certainty allows for the kind of persistent experimentation that eventually breaks through to breakthrough solutions. The third capacity, functioning effectively when progress is invisible, addresses one of the most psychologically challenging aspects of pursuing impossible things. Unlike conventional achievements, where progress is usually visible and measurable, impossible things often require extended periods where effort seems to produce no results at all. These periods are not signs of futility but natural characteristics of breakthrough achievement. Complex capabilities often develop non-linearly, with long periods of apparently minimal progress followed by sudden leaps in competence or understanding. Systems often reach tipping points where accumulated stress suddenly produces dramatic changes. Creative breakthroughs often require extensive preparation that bears no obvious relationship to the final insight. The individual capable of impossible things has learned to interpret invisible progress correctly rather than abandoning their efforts when results are not immediately apparent. They understand that significant achievements often require what could be called preparatory work effort, that is, building capabilities or setting conditions that will eventually enable success, even though the connection between the work and the desired outcome is not immediately obvious. This understanding allows them to maintain consistent effort even during periods when external observers would conclude that their approach is not working. They have learned to use internal indicators of progress, improvements in skill, understanding, or capacity rather than depending solely on external validation or visible results. Developing these three core capacities creates the foundation for what Machiavelli would have recognized as true mastery, the ability to achieve objectives that others consider impossible through the systematic application of superior strategy and sustained effort. This mastery is not mysterious or supernatural but follows predictable principles that can be understood and applied by anyone willing to undertake the necessary development. The first principle of mastery is what could be called strategic patience combined with tactical urgency. This involves maintaining a long-term perspective on ultimate objectives while applying maximum intensity and focus to immediate tasks. The master works on important projects with the understanding that they may require years to complete, but approaches each day's work with the urgency and attention to detail that the work deserves. This combination prevents both the premature abandonment that comes from expecting too much too quickly and the lack of focus that comes from thinking that individual efforts don't matter because the timeline is so extended. Every action is both a step toward long-term objectives and an opportunity to develop the capabilities that those objectives will eventually require. The second principle is systematic skill development that goes far beyond what conventional success requires. The individual pursuing impossible things cannot rely on existing capabilities but must continuously expand their competence in multiple areas simultaneously. This requires what could be called polymath preparation, developing expertise in several relevant fields rather than specializing deeply in only one area. This broad competence is essential because impossible things usually require novel combinations of existing knowledge and techniques rather than incremental improvements within established fields. The breakthrough solutions often come from applying insights from one field to problems in completely different areas, or from combining approaches that have never been integrated before. Systematic skill development also involves learning to learn more effectively, developing the metaskills that accelerate the acquisition of new capabilities. This includes techniques for rapid comprehension of complex material, methods for identifying the essential principles underlying different fields of knowledge, and strategies for transferring insights from areas where you have expertise to areas where you are a beginner. The third principle is the construction of what could be called compound systems, integrated approaches that produce multiple benefits simultaneously and that become more effective over time rather than less effective. Most people approach major objectives through linear strategies that require constant input of energy and attention. Masters develop systematic approaches that become self-reinforcing and that continue producing benefits even when their attention is directed elsewhere. Compound systems often involve building capabilities that serve multiple objectives simultaneously. For example, developing public speaking skills might simultaneously advance your career, expand your network of relationships, improve your ability to clarify your own thinking, and create opportunities to influence outcomes that matter to you. The time invested in this development produces returns across multiple areas of life rather than only serving one specific goal. These systems also involve creating what economists call positive feedback loops, situations where success in one area makes success in related areas more likely. The individual who develops a reputation for reliability finds that more opportunities are offered to them, which provides more chances to demonstrate reliability, which further enhances their reputation. The person who consistently produces high-quality work finds that clients and colleagues bring them better projects, which allows them to develop even higher levels of competence and reputation. The fourth principle is strategic leverage, the ability to achieve large outcomes through relatively small inputs by finding the points where effort produces maximum impact. This requires developing sophisticated understanding of systems and causation, learning to identify the factors that have disproportionate influence on outcomes. Strategic leverage often involves focusing effort on capabilities or positions that provide access to multiple opportunities rather than pursuing individual opportunities directly. Instead of applying for many jobs, the strategically leveraged individual might develop skills or relationships that make employers compete for their services. Instead of trying to sell products to many customers, they might focus on creating systems that make customers come to them. This leverage is not manipulation or shortcuts but intelligent efficiency, achieving more by understanding how systems actually work rather than by working harder within ineffective approaches. It requires the kind of strategic thinking that most people never develop because they remain focused on tactics and immediate results rather than on underlying patterns and principles. The fifth principle is what could be called adaptive superiority, the development of capabilities that allow you to thrive under conditions that disable or discourage most other people. Instead of trying to succeed under ideal conditions, masters learn to function effectively under difficult conditions, giving them competitive advantages that cannot be replicated by those who require comfort and predictability. This adaptive superiority often involves developing comfort with conditions that others find intolerable, working effectively while experiencing high levels of uncertainty, maintaining productivity during extended periods without external validation or encouragement, continuing to function well when facing criticism or opposition from others, and sustaining effort when progress is slow or invisible. These capabilities provide enormous competitive advantages because they allow the master to pursue opportunities that others abandon when conditions become difficult. While competitors retreat to comfortable and predictable approaches, masters advance into unexplored territory where competition is minimal and potential rewards are greatest. The systematic application of these principles over years of consistent effort produces individuals who appear to possess almost supernatural capabilities to those who have not undertaken similar development. They accomplish objectives that seem impossible because they have developed capabilities that are rare rather than because they have access to special resources or favorable circumstances. Their achievements are not accidents or lucky breaks but predictable results of systematic development applied with intelligence and persistence over extended periods. They have learned to think strategically about their own development, to invest effort in building capabilities rather than only pursuing immediate outcomes, and to maintain consistent effort over timescales that most people cannot even conceive. Most importantly, they have learned to derive their motivation and direction from their own vision and standards rather than from external validation or approval. This internal orientation makes them immune to the discouragement and misdirection that derail most people's efforts at significant achievement. They cannot be defeated by others because they have learned to defeat their own weaknesses, and they cannot be stopped by external obstacles because they have learned to use adversity as fuel for accelerated development. The ultimate insight that Machiavelli would have recognized in these individuals is that they have learned to create their own circumstances rather than merely responding to circumstances created by others. They have developed the rare capacity to impose their will on reality through sustained intelligent effort, transforming not only their own lives but often the world around them in ways that benefit countless others. This transformation from victim of circumstances to creator of circumstances is not available only to those with exceptional natural gifts or favorable backgrounds. It is available to anyone willing to undertake the systematic destruction of their own weaknesses and the deliberate construction of superior capabilities. The only requirements are honesty about current limitations, commitment to extended development, and the courage to persist when others would surrender. The man who destroys his weak self through this process of systematic transformation cannot be destroyed by others because he has eliminated the internal sources of defeat that make external defeat possible. He has become, in Machiavelli's terms, the master of his own fortune rather than its victim, capable of achieving what others consider impossible through the systematic application of mental steel forged in the furnace of deliberate self-improvement. The path from weakness to strength, from ordinary achievement to impossible accomplishments, is not mysterious but methodical. It requires nothing more than the systematic application of principles that have been understood by masters throughout history but practiced by very few. The question is not whether these principles work, their effectiveness has been demonstrated countless times across every field of human endeavor. The question is whether you possess the commitment and courage to apply them consistently over the years required for their full development. The choice, as always, is yours.